trust is the biggest factor in creating culture. And it really is coupled with then accountability. People, by and large, without patronizing them, without demeaning them, want to be led. Right. And so, what will you do to create a pathway that they could be led, where they could use their gifts and their abilities and their capacities that God has given them as well? And will you trust them? If you trust them and you go first, then the possibility is that the boomerang will come back. But you have to go first.
Welcome back to another episode of BeyondU. Today I'm joined with my co-host Ben. Ben, it's always a pleasure.
Looking forward to it.
And today we have the honor, the privilege to be joined by none other than Jim Dunn. Jim's a familiar voice on this podcast, so Jim, it's good to have you back.
Great to be here and glad to know you guys are doing your job.
Yeah.
Thanks for saying it's an honor to be with somebody that employs you.
We try. Yeah. No, it's good. It's good.
We're good.
Jim, we're coming off of Give Week. Tell us a little bit about Give Week, because in all reality, there might be some listening that are like, what is a Give Week? How did Give Week go this year? By the time that this podcast gets out, we're done with this thing. But tell us a little bit about Give Week, what it's about, how it went, all the things.
Yeah, Give Week has about a 4-year history at the university, and I don't really know what happened in the 1905 era, but anyway, it's just a special emphasis trying to raise money for student scholarships and our annual fund, and it takes a ton of money to run a place like this, and so every week is Give Week, in case somebody's wondering, like, did I miss it? I can't give.
No.
We'll take it on Monday or Tuesday or any day of the year, and so it really is something where we're asking people to partner with us in some special projects this year with renovating our oldest dorm, Wesley Hall, and taking a look at our annual fund and trying to just continue to up our investment in students and helping the university to thrive. So every dime that comes in is so beneficial to us. And there's little small gifts that come in that are significant. And I know some of the people that give, and they may not have very much. And then there's some other pretty big hits toward our budget, and we're very grateful for all of it. And what's fun is to see the momentum year over year to increase. And so we had a $100,000 match this year, and I think we will have met that when everything's tallied up. And so it's just a tremendous outpouring, and small gifts, medium-sized gifts, large gifts, it all counts, and we're very grateful.
For sure.
Well, I think that's some of the, we tell the audience is sometimes if you're not able to give much, people assume, well, I can't give like some other person.
Yeah.
But I think that's really cool that no matter the gift, it's appreciated and valued here.
Absolutely. The widow's mite is something that Jesus talked about, and it all counts. It all adds up. And so those small gifts are very significant as well. And then there's other people that are kind of, I refer to them as Nicodemus in the New Testament, that are just loaded with all kinds of resources. Yeah. And it'd be great if they'd consider the university now and in their legacy, and be a part of something bigger than themselves.
For sure. And if you're wondering, like, how does this Give Week, how would my gift help someone? We get the privilege, the three of us amongst the other staff members here, to interact with students every day who are on the kind of the benefiting end of these gifts, and we get to see firsthand, day in, day out, the lives being transformed. And so for those that have given, we say thank you.
Absolutely.
And for those that are considering giving, we preemptively say thank you.
Yeah.
Because it really is changing lives.
Yeah, Wendy and I were students here. I was a freshman here 40 years ago in 1984.
Just a few years ago.
Dinosaurs or whatever. But somebody gave for scholarships that we were awarded back then. And now it's our turn. Yeah. And so Wendy and I talk about that and try to be generous out of our own resources to try to make sure that just continues, and helping students be able to afford a great and quality and Christian education.
For sure.
Is so vital today.
Yeah, and it prepares them for a lifetime of all kinds of opportunities ahead.
Yep.
40 years ago, you were here as a student, and this place prepared you. And since then, you've sat in a variety of seats of leadership. And today's conversation is going to be all about leadership. And no one better than our own leader to have this conversation with. So thanks for joining us. But, Ben and I, as we were thinking about this episode and the conversation today, we we're just so intrigued by your style of leadership, and knowing that over the different seasons of your life, your leadership, even in its capacities and different forms and functions, it's had to change over time. And so, for the listener that might not know Jim Dunn the way that we know Jim Dunn, tell us a little bit about your story of leadership. I mean, even since you've left OKWU as a student, I mean, you've sat in so many different seats. So walk us through a little bit of that journey, and the various capacities of leadership that you've been in. I know that's probably a hard task for this conversation just because you've sat in so many seats, but walk us through a little bit of that journey.
Yeah, so I graduated from here in 1988. I went straight into seminary. I didn't want to go to seminary, not because I didn't like the idea. There were 12 churches that had contacted me. That doesn't mean I had the job, but I wanted to get involved in ministry, what I was trained to do. And seminary was the 13th thing on my list, literally. And so glad that I did, because it allowed me to mature. So following seminary, went through that, and then took a church. And so while I was in school, though, I refereed basketball, which taught me a lot of lessons in how to deal with
Leadership
people.
challenges there.
Yeah,
Did you ever get booed out of the gym?
I did, yeah. And I threw a few fans out of a gym as well.
Nice.
Not for booing, but mostly for expletives. But regardless, that was preparation for me to deal with conflict and
sure.
be in difficult decisions and spur of the moment kinds of things where you have to, you don't always have a rule book later, and most referees don't know the rule book anyway. But regardless, getting through that was a big piece of my development. That's how I paid tuition money and invested in my education. And then I took a church. And so actually had a pretty decent contract in what's called the Missouri Valley Conference to be able to be a college referee. And I took a church instead. So God won again and hung up the whistle. But in that church, I was able to grow and develop and be loved and know what it means to love people. And it was something where I was the solo pastor. Once in a while, I was swabbing out a commode and going over to make sure the heat was on Saturday night. And
Your pastor, janitor, kids
doing
thing.
I ran the sound system from the stage.
Yard and
I
all
was
that,
the tech.
Yeah.
You guys are going to laugh at that because I can't even figure out these mics. But anyway, then was called into denominational leadership and led a thing called spiritual formation, which was all the kids, youth, and adult ministry for the denomination, the Wesleyan Church. And that evolved into some more responsibility called church multiplication and discipleship, and was the executive director of that. I've been asked to consider being the general superintendent at various times. And now I'm a university president, even though I've never worked for a school before now. And people tell me, don't tell people that. It makes you look bad. I don't worry about looking bad. And it's one of the things that gets you through any kind of position. And that is the fact that you have to know who you are and who you are in Christ. And it sounds egotistical, but leadership is a spiritual gift. And you can try to train it. You can try to teach it. You could hone up on some elements of leadership
For sure.
and pick up some tips here and there. But, when there's no 2 good emails in a row, no 2 good days in a row, you better know who you are in Christ, and you better know that you're called. And so I'm a huge calling guy, and I bathe any transition in prayer. Lots of different decisions that I've prayed over and God took care of before I had to. Very grateful for those times. And at the same time, you have to be confident enough to know that you're going to keep a place or a ministry or an institution on mission, and you're going to do whatever it takes to do that. And so I had a lot of people that believed in me and gave me opportunities. One of the forming grounds for me as a leader that got me outside of the bubble of even ministry was leading denominational youth conventions. And so those happened every couple of years to start out with. And I was asked as a young pastor to be on the executive team, and then eventually became the executive director. It's probably why I was elected. I was trusted in that, and then became a denominational leader. I was dealing with thousands of contracts, literally, with hotels and artists and food and beverage kinds of things and
Because ministry school
obligations.
prepared you for that, right?
Absolutely. I learned everything
Concessions
here at
101.
Oklahoma Wesleyan about contract law and addendums and all kinds of things that dealt with unions and labor laws in cities and, all the behind the scenes things. Or I'm not a farm boy, but I call it the underbelly of life where you just have to deal with all this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means. But anyway, there's just stuff that's not pleasant sometimes. And dealing with personalities that really weren't Christ followers. They were just business people. They were cutthroat, dealing with mayors and convention bureau directors. And then also because of knowing who I was, trying to be a witness to them for Christ in the middle of all of that 25 years of
Yeah.
dealing with youth conventions taught me a lot.
I believe
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. One of the things you've talked about is just the various leadership aspects or roles that you've been in, Jim. And I think one of the misnomers maybe for young or aspiring leaders is the more you work your way up, the more comfortable or easier leadership gets, right? And I think you would be the first to admit that's not true. So what were some of the unique challenges at each level, from local church to, international organization to now university president? What were some of the unique challenges along the way?
Yeah, I think it's more in your head than it's actually happening. And so, as a young pastor, I would have pastor, I need to meet with you. And I figured it was the end of the world on occasion. It's like, what do they want to meet with me about? I got really, really introspective, and it actually caused me some inner kind of torment, if I can say it that way, where it usually was nothing. Right? They wanted to tell me about their granddaughter and ask for prayer or something, which was great and great conversation. But I would just flip out. Like, I wonder what they want to talk to. I wonder what I said last Sunday. that
What did I
tipped them
do?
off.
Yeah.
And this is before email, so they had to meet with people. But anyway, that is something that you just gain more and more confidence. And then there's some life situations that happen where that God has helped you through a particular season. Maybe it was a difficult personnel decision. Maybe it was something personal. In my case, the sickness of my first wife and her eventual death to cancer. And, when you go through some of those deep waters, then it's not that you want other stuff to come, but if you can deal with that, you can deal with a whole lot of other stuff. And there's some things that just don't matter after a while. So I think when I was younger, I made a big deal out of stuff that I probably shouldn't have. And, I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to, take care of this, and I'm going to make this swapping decision, whatever. Later on, you get to a point where you have to have the confidence as a leader that a lot of things just don't matter. And even if somebody else thinks that the world's on fire, it's usually not.
Right.
And there's very few emergencies that have to be dealt with right now. But at the same time, in running a university, you might have 50 decisions a day, literally.
Yeah.
I don't count, right? But I don't think I'm that far off. And you don't have time to sit around and stew and saying, well, I don't know if I should, maybe I'll make that decision tomorrow when it has to be made today. And you got to go with it. So knowing who you are, knowing that God has called you, and then knowing from experience that you can have confidence. And yeah, it's not fun when somebody doesn't like what you did or somebody doesn't agree with what you did. But at the same time, you go back into leaning on your calling and your confidence in Christ, not because you're always right, but you know that you did it as unto Christ instead of just for your own good.
Yeah.
And there are many times, even as a young pastor, eventually was able to see the church grow and able to hire staff. There were occasions where I would sit with a board and they would say, okay, we're going to raise your salary. You're doing a great job. And I would stop them, literally. And even if they listen to this, they'll know that this happened. I made sure that all of my staff got a raise before I did.
Yeah.
And I made sure that some things that were in arrears before I even got there, that they had to take care of that obligation before they took care of me. My family, we were fine, but we didn't benefit from those kinds of decisions. So if you're going to make it all about you and you're going to only look at what's good for you instead of the good of the whole, then you're in trouble as a leader, and you're going to have the wrong motives. You're going to have the wrong goals. And there's so many leaders that only look out for themselves, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is to realize that you have to absorb chaos and then distribute hope. right? There are things that will come at you that nobody else knows about, and you really aren't going to do anybody a favor by blabbing it around.
Right.
You have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's not always good, even physically for you or mentally for you. So you got to have something where there's an outlet somewhere where you can trust, probably a neutral party, not somebody that's in your church, not somebody that's at your university. Um, I personally have set up, and nobody knows who these are except for our board chair. I personally have an accountability band, is what I call it, in Wesley's kind of terms. And there's three persons that I trust, and we meet quarterly, and they get to ask me whatever they want. Did I do anything selfishly? Was I inappropriate in any way? What is it that you're struggling with today? What do you fear the most? And it's a great experience for me. But in asking these three trusted leaders if they've ever done this, they all three looked at me and said no.
Yeah.
And it's not because they felt like they might have needed it or might not have needed it. We talk about it all the time. Christians should be great at accountability
Yeah.
and answering questions and being forthright and being, contrite before the Lord and honest. And if you have a bunch of secrets, I guess, then you're going to be a pretty selfish leader.
One of the things that I just recently read, I think it's James Clear, the guy that wrote Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Such a great book. But he was talking about, life being a series of seasons.
Yeah.
What worked in one season may not work in the next, and what works now might not have worked before. And so
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit, just as you think of your leadership lifetime and season sections, if you will. Like, how have you had to adapt, like your own personal leadership throughout those seasons over time? Like, what have those seasons looked like, and what was that adaptation like for you?
Yeah, and this is probably the key for leaders anywhere in any organization, and that is they cannot change their style. So they'll reach a limit where there's just something that maybe is beyond them and they cannot change their style. So I'm not sure that I'm great at this, but it is something that I pay attention to. And that is, when you're young and you're coming straight out of school, you're taught that you can do anything, which is great. That's a great attribute to have. Then life happens and you find out that you can't do much, right? And there are other people that will remind you that you didn't do much and that it wasn't that great. And other than your mom, cheering you on, there's others that just might not have liked that, or they might not like you. But in my case, in smaller organizations, I could know pretty much everything. And part of me liked that. And so you could call it micromanagement, you could call it a control freak, you could call it OCD, you could call it anything you want, but you were taught that you needed to kind of know what that's like. So I would call that a chaplain kind of stage where you're really connected, and there's nothing that's wrong with it. But in order for that organization to grow, sociologically even, you're only going to know about probably 70 people. And there's a reason why churches are the size that they are. But I'm not here to make accusations. I'm just a student of how people work, right? So if I have to control everything, then it really is going to be limited. It's going to cap.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lid to that thing. And then you get into maybe places where the audience isn't as direct or right in front of you. And so it's kind of a macro thing. They're at a distance. You're actually kind of guessing what they need, because you don't have a whole lot of feedback sometimes, and you're trying to pretend you're in their shoes and how would I serve them and what kinds of things would be helpful and value added to them. And then eventually, if you have the honor of being able to work with others, I really don't like the word boss, but we can talk about that all day long if you'd like. I don't think anybody's a boss except Jesus, but regardless, it is something where you have the title to lead others, and there's a flow chart, there's a food chain, the whole deal. But you have to then begin to not just trust yourself, but you have to trust others. And you have to believe that they're doing their job. And you believe that and you trust them until you can't. And if you can't, then you don't need them. And it sounds harsh, but if they're not going to do their job and you have to do it for them, then somebody's not being paid enough and somebody's being overpaid, right? So you trust, you verify, you continue to realize that you can be a shepherd to people. And then at some point in time, I love these images from chaplain to shepherd. And then what about equipper? Like, will you actually help your people be developed? So there's a lot of leaders that won't get into helping their people grow, and you're actually robbing the people around you. It's not that you abdicate everything to them, but you step them up, is what I call it. You get them into the next phase. And if you don't offer those opportunities, it doesn't mean that it's a raise. It doesn't mean it's even a different position. It's, hey, I would like for you to oversee this. I think you could do it. I'm right here with you. We're going to walk through it. I see this in you, and God has wired you for this, and you're ready to go. Let's do it. And I'm going to support you on the way. And we're going to walk, we're going to crawl, but eventually you're going to run this thing. And this is where you develop your bench. This is where you develop the people around you. And if you don't do it, you're robbing them.
Yep.
You're stealing their opportunities. People pushed me into places I didn't belong, even as a referee. And I didn't belong. You know, they'd call me on Friday night and say, hey, you're my first choice. And there's a 6 o'clock game and it's 4:30.
Yeah.
You know, and the game is an hour away. Can you go? Like, yeah, I wasn't your first choice, but you get pressed into different things, and a good leader will see the potential, see the capacity, and they'll create those opportunities. So that becomes the equipper. The funnest part for me, and I've been able to watch these 4 phases, is to be a multiplier. So now I can look at somebody else and say, okay, so how are you developing the people around you? We're developing together. I'm developing you. You're developing me. We're working together. So what about the people around you? You know, some people call it the getting run over by a bus theory. That's not a great image, but anyway, who's next?
Yeah.
Who's coming up next? And most organizations actually fail because they don't develop the next set of leaders. And they hold it all to themselves. So it's probably too wide for the camera today, so I'll condense it. But you can lead like this. You can pull everything into yourself. You can lead it. You can control it. It's going to be limited, but you can do it, and it'll feel pretty good if you're wired that way. Or you can lead like this, with your hands straight out and wide, and trying to see the potential in every person, and encouraging them, correcting them if they need it, steering them a little bit, helping them think about something else. So chaplain, shepherd, equipper, multiplier. Again, some of this will sound egotistical, but looking at somebody and saying, you know what, every day you should look and say, this is what I do. And it's not opportunism. It's just, you should look at the ways that God wants to develop you and grow you today.
Yeah.
What is that? Yeah. Instead of just coasting, or I'm going to be in this position forever. In this season of the year, there's some coaches that probably thought they'd be coaching a team or a college team or a football, whatever, basketball team forever. And that doesn't happen. If you don't win, you're gone.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Yeah.
Right.
Look at the
Quicker than
landscape right now.
We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah. And so people want success, and that's a really tricky thing in the kingdom of God. What is success? And, you know, if somebody's not satisfied with the way things are going, then I guess they'll let you know. But I have always had a board that supervised me. So pastor, denominational leader, university president. My cycle has gone in like 15 years in my career. It's kind of crazy to think about, but pastored 15, denominational leader 15. I'm in year number 5.
You're a third of the way there.
Yeah,
At least 2 years left.
I mean, it might not turn out that it's 15. Who knows? I don't always get to make that decision, right? But things are seemingly going well, and I'm not worried about that. But the only job I'd never had a board was actually in this town of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. I was a shoe shine locker room attendant at the country club here. It's the only job so far that I've been fired from. I apparently ground down this guy's heel way too much. He didn't like it. Some guy that made a lot of money here in town, and I got fired on day 2. So apparently I'm not good at shining shoes. I don't know. So you got to find out what you're called to do.
Yeah. You brought up something, Jim, that I just want to piggyback on for a minute. In leadership, there's a difference between kind of chasing success, which isn't really, it's not a bad thing in and of itself. But what I hear you saying is there's also great value in creating culture, right? In a multiplying culture. So talk to us a little bit about the difference between establishing or building culture as a leader as opposed to just chasing metrics, whatever that may be.
Yeah. So I have a rule that I try to live out, and that is you have to go first. right? So it doesn't mean that you get to complain first. That's not what I'm talking about. But you have to go first. You have to set out what you think is the direction that should be taken. And I mean, you could be Moses coming back down from the mountain with tablets, and they crush them, right? They didn't like
Yeah.
him coming down with the Ten Commandments
Yeah.
off Sinai, and so it could be that you get rejected. But people, by and large, without patronizing them, without demeaning them, want to be led. Right. And so, what will you do to create a pathway that they could be led, where they could use their gifts and their abilities and their capacities that God has given them as well? And will you trust them? And so, trust is the biggest factor in creating culture. And it really is coupled with then accountability. And like I said, biblically, we should be the best at keeping things and keeping ourselves and keeping people accountable. But people don't like it. And anytime you put in accountability, you can expect somebody to raise their hand or raise their head or maybe even raise a rifle. I'll tell you someday about being held at gunpoint as a pastor. But anyway, I was taken hostage.
Whole episode, right?
Yeah. But anyway, you literally have to know which direction you're going in. You were asked to lead, and you better lead. And so that's not something, though, that you demean anybody else. There's a little bit of a key that you cannot let people feel like they don't know what they're doing. You cannot. You can't let them even smell that. But you have to pretend, not that you know everything. There's a lot of things you're leading. You don't know how it's going to turn out, right? But you have to pretend that you're not going to assume anything, and you're going to continually stress your mission, your values, the direction you're going in, and people will self-select. Like, yeah, I could follow that, or nah, I'm going to go somewhere else, or I don't want to be held accountable to that either. And so it's not there to be a millstone or some kind of trick. It's there to help guide whatever the vision and goals are. But mission is cardiac. Who you hire is cardiac for any organization, and they don't have to be like you. As a matter of fact, they'd be better if they're not.
Right.
They shouldn't always just think like you. They shouldn't just rubber stamp every idea you have, because I've had some really bad ideas that somebody should have said, that's a really bad idea, right? But at the same time, if you trust them and you go first, then the possibility is that the boomerang will come back. But you have to go first.
It's so good. I mean, the power of trust and appropriate vulnerability and accountability. And we don't see it a lot in leadership today, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Covey hit the nail on the head, the speed of trust. Like it'll change an organization faster than anything.
One thing that's been interesting to me, it's actually in a John Townsend book that I've been reading recently called People Fuel, is that a lot of times as a leader, you're looked to for all the answers, Mr. and Mrs. Fix It. And I've had some life experiences that just crushed me personally, where I had to realize I couldn't fix everything, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so this book, though, gets into, and I'm still reading it and trying to process it. And I don't really like the terms that are used. Not that they're bad. I just don't quite connect with me. But as a leader, you're usually the sourcer of things. So you're the ones that have the answers. You have to make the decision. Everybody else is just waiting, which that's a terrible culture to be in, where somebody doesn't know what initiatives they should take, and keeping their head up and keeping their eyes open and having the freedom to do it. But then, are you ever the sourcee? Like, do you ever receive? Like, do you ever let somebody inside of your decision-making process? Do you ever let somebody, like, here's what I'm thinking, and I don't know what to do? Or are you trapped in the reality of our culture today, in at least the Western hemisphere, is that if you say, I don't know what to do, then they think you're weak. They think you've lost every leadership ability that ever was supposed to happen. They think you're indecisive. They think that that we're doomed. Like, what is wrong with saying I don't know what to do? I mean, that's just straight out of the Old Testament, right? And I don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you, and we're asking God for wisdom. There's something every day I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with it. That's happened all of my life, right? And somebody will ask me, like, do do you disagree with people? I said, yeah, sometimes myself, right? You're standing in the mirror and there's nobody next to me, right? Like, I don't know if I did that right. I don't know if I said that right. I probably shouldn't have done that. Probably shouldn't have said that. I opened up a can of worms because I wasn't careful with that. And it's not that you have to just worry all the time, but you need to be wise and, you know, essentially be willing to say I was wrong.
Yeah.
You know, some of our listeners will have to Google it, but you know, you should not have Arthur Fonzarelli disease. You can be wrong. Fonzie could never say he was wrong. Unhappy does. He always stuttered through the word wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just wrong. It's not anything that's, you know, usually a big consequential thing, but it may have hurt someone. It may have been the wrong decision. You got to own it, apologize, and then figure out how you're going to recover and move on.
Yeah, no, that's good. We talked a little bit about mission right there and how critical and to use your words, cardiac, that mission is.
Yeah.
And there's this thought that, you know, the method might change, but the mission doesn't.
Yeah.
Do you agree or disagree with that?
Absolutely. So even, you know, just in biblical application, the message never changes.
Yeah.
But the method and how you deliver that definitely does. I mean,
Has
look
to.
at technology, right? People hated the printing press because it would spread all the devil's garbage, right? Well, it also spreads the Bible
Right.
to Gutenberg and beyond. People don't like the internet, which there's a lot of garbage on the internet, but what a great way to reach the corners of the earth with the gospel,
Right.
like to make disciples of all nations,
Right.
the mandate and commission we have. So all of those things to say that you have to take a look at methods, modalities. How is it that you will deliver the information that you have, whether you're a ministry at a university, we're a ministry here, how will you educate?
Right.
You know, people are just throwing their hands in the air over artificial intelligence. I've told people I've had artificial intelligence all of my life. Like,
That's good.
I was a pastor's kid. I made stuff up all the time. But it's something that, you know, that's a tool.
Yeah.
And it will change how information is delivered.
Totally.
Now there's a debate in churches, and all of a sudden we're not going to stream our services anymore. Well, why is that? Is it because it's too much work? Is it because your content isn't good enough to attract somebody? I think it's a side door to the church. People will check you out. There used to be, we'd say they'd check out your sign and your parking lot back before any of this existed. And then they'd talk to a friend, and then we'd talk about a web page. They'd check that out and see what was on there. And then they might be able to listen to a sermon once we figured out how to record those from our cassette tapes onto online. And now they're looking at podcasts and streams, and that's a side door to your church.
Sure.
If there was anybody, you guys didn't ask this question, but if anybody asked me, like, should you stream or should you just only provide, you know, in-person worship? The kingdom is bigger than your four walls. So I would encourage you to continue to look at digital ways that you could spread the gospel.
For sure.
So no, they should all be here. That is, I'll just call it what it is, in my opinion, and fans can send their letters and emails. But it really is, that's an ego conversation that they have to be at my feet in order for it to count.
Yeah. So then as a leader, how do you make sure that you're chasing the mission, not a method, right? Because sometimes those can get conflated in the moment, especially when the moment is intense and you're really in the trenches of whatever your line of work might be. How do you make sure that you are chasing that mission and not the method that does change?
Yeah, there's two or three things that pop into my head. One is a phrase my father used a lot when I was growing up, and that is, if your goal is something you can figure out, your God is too small. So what is it in your mission that will stretch you to have to believe in God more and keep you on your knees, keep you on your face? That's one thing. Like, it's impossible without him. That should be a question. Like, if you can figure out everything that's going to happen through your purpose and mission and vision, then you probably are controlling that too much. Humanity is controlling that too much. That's one thing. The other thing is that you need to know your mission and why you exist, and don't let anything shake that. There are all kinds of things and ideas and good, well-meaning people that, hey, you should do this, or you guys should start this. And if it doesn't fit in that umbrella of your mission, then you have to ask yourself a question, which seems obvious, but most people don't ask it. Like, should we actually do that? Like, what are you going to say no to? not just everything. Yeah, we do that.
Yeah.
Well, does it fit your mission? I don't know. We just should do that, right? So we just start looking at success. I mean, we might start looking at revenue. We're only going to do something that's going to create this pool of money over here, or this will make us look really good, or that one won't have enough PR to it, so there's really no marketing gain in it. When you start making those kind of decisions instead of what's for the good of God,
Yeah.
or my phrase is what's for the good of the whole, not just you or a certain few. You start making decisions that are off of those two questions, then you're off.
Yeah.
You're going to end up in the wrong place.
Yeah. Well, and there's some necessary critical reflection space that's required as a leader. And one of the things that you've been challenging our executive leadership team here at the university is finding that margin to be able to get your head a little bit above the tree line just to think about some of these things. Talk to us a little bit. I think you call it the 50-20-20, or I might have messed that up. Why don't you just
It's
say,
all right.
talk to us about that, because I think it's so vital for anybody that's in leadership to have that margin to be able to critically think and reflect on these things.
Yeah, you get caught up in the day to day in any job, and you don't have time. You don't have margin to think.
Yeah.
You're just dealing with thing to thing to thing. And I mean, that's daily for a leader, that you can get trapped in that. So what will you intentionally do knowing that if a day is added up to 100, or a week is added up to 100, or a month is added up to 100, if that's the equation, you probably know 50% of that's going to be occupied by some pretty standard things. There's different things that are inherent to every job, that those are just the routine things. It doesn't mean they're bad. They have to be accomplished. You probably know a 50%. 25% of your day or your month or your year is going to be an interruption, something that's unexpected. Right. And this isn't foolproof on, well, what if it was 24%? Okay. It doesn't matter. Right. But a portion of what you're doing is going to be responding, crises, unexpected things, things that you didn't think were going to happen. If it really is a worldwide pandemic that people still debate about, it's probably going to be 100% of that year. But anyway, you get the drift that you probably know 50% of what you should probably be doing or you're responsible for. 25% is going to be an interruption. What if the other 25% could be margin that you think about tomorrow?
Yeah.
Like what's going to happen next year? What kinds of things do we need to be planning today that we need to stop next year? Why would we stop them? What kinds of things do we need to start next year? Why would we start those? And if you don't create that kind of margin, then you're trapped in the day to day. All of a sudden a year goes by and you haven't changed a thing. What if you did that in your spiritual life? What if you did it in your personal growth? What if you did it in your professional growth? What if you did it in your job? You have to create margin to think about what's down the road.
Yeah.
If we don't do that, and I think we see this in a lot of leadership spaces, we tend up just kind of in reactive mode. Like
That's
we're
right.
we're putting out fires all the time, right? So what advice would you give to leaders on kind of moving from just problem solving all the time to more of a proactive posture of leadership? Like I know you talk about 2030 all the time, which seems a long way away here,
It's
but
not.
it's not,
It's
right?
not.
I mean, so what advice would you give to people to create more margin and to think about more proactive leadership as opposed to just putting out fires or solving problems 24 hours a day?
Yeah, I learned this mostly through youth convention planning, believe it or not. I with permission of my church, I scheduled every Friday just to work on that. It was supposed to be my day off, right? But I knew I was taking on extra responsibility. I was compensated for it. And it was a lot. We would have 400 volunteers. It took us 2 years to plan an event for 10,000 kids that lasted 3 days. It was a $4 or $5 million budget. I mean, it was a lot.
Yep.
But so essentially, I spent 52 days every year and dedicated Friday to that. I didn't have, needs for a young family at that point in time, most of that. And so I could dedicate, and I got permission from my board. So I intentionally just deliberately scheduled for it. That's one thing. Like, can I block out a half a day?
Yeah.
If something happens, it happens,
Sure.
right? If I had a funeral on
control
Friday, right?
Right.
I knew I had to do that. It wasn't something that I was just, in jail over, but it really was something that I scheduled. That's one thing. I think the other thing is, I mean, it's an old cliche, but it's so true. Leaders are readers,
Mm.
and you have to figure out where you're going to be fed. So, as a pastor, might find this a little crazy, but like Christmas Eve, I would do our services at the church I was leading, and then I went all over town the rest of the night and would go to 11 o'clock stuff, 9 o'clock stuff. Our stuff might have ended at 7. After a while, we had so many I couldn't do that.
Sure.
Easter, we'd be somewhere. Even as a denominational leader, nobody wants you as a guest at Easter, so we go to our church, and I go to 3 other ones. Right? My family thought I was crazy. Like, how many resurrections are you going to go through in one day? Like, as many as I can.
Yeah.
But I knew what would feed me. I used to watch televangelists, even some that I didn't agree with at all. I was just hungry because I was giving out all the time.
Yeah.
So in this season, there's some colleagues that I can talk to, like, hey, what do you do with this? And some seasoned presidents that I, pick their brain on. And some of it, I do what I tell other people to do with my stuff. You keep the gold and you throw away the dirt and you get a good idea. But there's a lot of great literature. I'm not a big movie guy, but I was actually really inspired by watching The Finest Hour with Churchill
Yeah.
and how he arranged the boats. He was the only guy that believed, like the only one,
Yeah. In all of England. Yeah.
to save the island from the Nazis, right? And he did it, right? He had staff that helped. I get it, but he's flashing the victory sign, smoking his cigar all over the place. But who's going to believe that this place can be more vital? That whatever you're leading, this organization, this department can be more successful. That we should be better than what we are. How are we going to get from thriving instead of just surviving? Somebody has to believe for that. And anywhere I go, I'll look at a place. I look at this place. And, somebody believed back in the mid 50s for our current campus now. Okay, it took a flat tire to stick somebody here instead of getting to Dallas, and they bought the mansion on our campus. But somebody believed for a new library. Somebody believed back in the day for a gymnasium. Somebody believed that, we could put sidewalks in and have a chapel. And I mean, there's all kinds of things that I reflect on quite a bit. Like, somebody believed enough to put their life on the line, to invest, to give themselves to this, to hold out for hope on it. And I'm pretty sure in history, there are a lot of people that won't dare to believe.
That's good.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned hope there, Jim, at the end of that. And we usually ask our guests, what gives you hope right now? But I'm going to give you a more nuanced, specific question. What gives you leadership hope right now?
I think it's seriously wrapped up in the fact that you can be part of something that is so much bigger than yourself. And so the hope that I carry comes from Christ first and foremost. But then I see other people getting it. I see other people jumping on board. Maybe it's something where they support us tangibly in a give week. And you see the momentum, and you see the community supporting us in some of the rezoning that we just got approved, and trying to be a good neighbor and expanding our facilities. You see it in your students. And I tell our students all the time, which I'm pretty sure others might take wrongly, but I'm here for them. I believe in them. And somebody believed in me. And I mean, if you went back and asked all of my professors at Bartlesville Wesleyan College if I was presidential material, that would be probably this podcast's best joke, right? But there were people that believed in me. They pushed me. Some of them I didn't like because I thought they were too harsh, and yet they were some of my best teachers. So being able to be part of somebody else and replicating the experience that I had, that is a privilege. It is not a chore to be a leader. If you're in a leadership position and it's a chore, like, there's days when you got to grind, right? I mean, it's just, you got to get in the mud and you got to dig it out. But if you have no sense that you're doing this for the pleasure of the Lord, then you're in the wrong spot.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jim. This has been rich. There are a lot of
pleasure.
nuggets, even my brain, just to think about. So thanks for coming on and leading us so well. Tori, anything else for you today?
No, same thought there. Lots of good to be had in this conversation. Thank you.